close unless the board, well, the board didn't demand anything, so we've got nothing pressing, and I would like to think that little holiday month off can do everybody good, considering it's also, you know, the fun part in the administration and the switchover that we're dealing with. So as you can see, next year's calendar is already up. We are permanently the second Thursday of the month. That is set, as you can see, through the calendar through June. So put that on your calendars, let your secretaries or if you're your own secretary, make sure it's on your calendar. One of the things we had discussed, but we haven't brought back, was the issue on SDC, the 101 pupil grants. We would like to see that in January. Let's tentatively plan on AB 127 because there should be an update from the expert working group working together with those who are interested from the implementation committee. So that should be an update. So if those who are interested in working with the expert work group, I know Bill Savage is part of that on working on grant adequacy in AB 127. If somebody is interested from IMP, let me know, and I'll make sure that you're on that email list for meetings and can provide your input as well. Yes, Fred?
What was the 101?
It was with special day class. Juan, can you help me?
Just to take a look at the requirement to have at least 101 pupil grants in the modernization project, and how does that relate to special ed class pupils that have a different loading standard, different size projects, and whether that threshold should be re-evaluated specifically for non-severe and severe students.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of a side issue we hadn't brought up, but I'll want to see if we can include in the SDC conversation. I think there's a difference in the policy and interpretation of how we use K-12 grants to build SDC, and whether it's allowable for districts to use K-12 grants to build SDC, and how that is determined basically on SPF regs 1859.77.3. I believe OPSC says no, and some of us might think that we need to take a look at that and see what the proper usage of the grants are and how that's used. Because I think there's been two different sets of interpretation, but we can look at that. But if we're going to look at SDC, I'd rather look at all the issues that might be surrounding it instead of piecemealing it. So right now, that is what we have for future potential items come January. Extra space. I know, you come late, extra space. We might be able to squeeze together and we can share. Squish in. Squish in. And go ahead and pull some chairs. There's a chair.
Yeah, she's squished there, but there's a spot. Smash up there for your mother.
I know. So future reference, I'll remind Lisa Jones, let's try and not book this room.
More space.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, Kathy.
Bill today, yeah.
Oh, you're Bill Savage today?
I'm Bill today.
Welcome. So we were just going over future agenda items, and that we're permanently the second Thursday of the month. So I'm going to now turn it over to an update. I thought in light of everything that was going on, it was good to have an update on what was going on with DIR. So Juan, all you or Brian, whoever's got it.
The DIR regulations have been repealed by the Office of Administrative Law. And there's a time period, and I believe it's, Brian, you can fill me in, but I think it's through May 4th of 2011. So we are working through now what the impacts are. If the regulations are repealed, how does that impact the OPSC funding applications, the process at this point, and then Brian can fill in, but we're asking for you guys to submit your questions now that this action has been taken by OEL on the DIR regs. What questions do you have in terms of your project? Specifically, if we could, just for OPSC's funding, but we can do it in general. We're going to be working with DIR as actually, we're asking for you to please submit all your questions that you may have on the process. Yes.
Are you referring to questions on just the regulations or on SBX 2.9 as well?
I think there's a lot of questions. Right now, the main questions that we heard so far is what happens to the projects that were in that transition period, or I don't know if we want to call it transition period, but through signed contracts after August 1st through November 4th. I think that's the effective date of the repeal. Is that correct, Brian? So there's projects that were in this time frame. What happens to them in terms of funding? That's what we're focused with. I'm sure districts have other questions in terms of meeting DAR compliance, which is a DRR question, and what they did or didn't do during that time period. But just what questions do you have? And we'll sort them out. What are OPSC questions? What can we address? And the other ones that we can't, that are DAR questions, and we'll leave it up to them to address those.
But I think,
Sorry, go ahead.
But I think what's really important is that we also see the questions, even though it might be in the jurisdiction of DIR, so that we understand, because that's part of the problem. What happened before is everybody was talking to DIR, we were trying to talk to DIR, but we weren't coordinating, and that's where a lot of this confusion, unanswered questions came up. So to the extent of, even if you're emailing DIR, of keeping OPSC and us informed of those questions, because it may, while on the face of it, seem like it doesn't have an impact on OPSC, it might in our regs and how we look at things and how we implement that stuff. Brian, do you have any further information?
That's a good point. We were told that some districts were calling DIR asking 5005 information, and so I understand there's a lot of confusion and some things up in the air. What we're trying to do right now is, Juan was talking about, was we understand that districts are sort of caught in the middle as the law changed several times throughout the project, and we just want to try to address specific situations. So any questions that come in are fine, but the priority will be, I'm the district, I have this issue, can I have some guidance to make sure that everything flows smoothly, and that will be the priority. As much detail that can be provided will help us. Certainly you can send an email to me or Laurel, or...
So you or Laurel are going to be the main contacts?
Yes, or
Okay.
the SAB-IMP account.
Okay.
It's on the meeting notice, just in case anyone...
Reads the notice.
Can you say your email address for those that are...
Webcast.
My email is...
Say your email first, because we want them to contact you.
Copy. My email address is Brian, Bryan, .odell @dgs.ca.gov. And Laurel's, is it still winter? Okay. Email address recently married, so it's Laurel. Go ahead, I don't want to spell your name.
LAUREL.winter, WINTER, @dgs.ca.gov.
So please have them as the main ones. Does anybody in the audience have any specific questions? Come on up. Yeah. It's not on? It's not on?
I don't think that one's on either.
Uh-oh. We got a problem. Okay, you just get to speak loud, Patty.
I'm sorry, I'm sick.
Here.
Is this on?
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you're providing this update for us. I think you may be aware that Cash, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, we put out an alert for our members with some of the questions that we had been receiving from the field about how to manage projects that have been caught in between the different requirements. So I would urge OPSC to take a look at that and see if you could provide any guidance in those particular situations. We offered what we thought was the best guidance for school districts as part of that alert, but I'm sure that school districts would find some comfort in hearing directly from OPSC. I would also encourage you to send out some kind of mass communication to all school districts with the contact information and letting them know that you're soliciting their questions. And then finally, we had invited Nancy Stephan from the Department of Industrial Relations to come and address our group at our general membership meeting last Wednesday, and she was gracious enough to come and put herself in front of what could be the firing squad. I just wanted to mention that one of the things that Nancy highlighted, at least for me, was that because we keep talking to them about how do we ensure that districts who are caught between the two different requirements, entered into contracts on or after August 1, and yet the requirements changed on them as a result of the repeal of the regulations. How do we ensure that those projects are not harmed 6 years from now at the time of project audit? And one of the things that I asked Nancy was, is there any way that you can provide school districts sort of a letter that says X date, which would be the repeal of the regulations on November 8th, and let's just say 2 or 3 months, we're going to grant you a grace period to transition from one set of requirements to the other. And it seemed that DIR would be amenable to providing that, but one of the things that she had mentioned, and I had not thought of it in this particular case, but she didn't believe that DIR had the jurisdiction to require labor compliance programs, that the requirement, although it's in the labor code section, but that the requirement for LCPs stems from the funding source, which of course is our bonds. And so she had mentioned that it would be then the jurisdiction of the State Allocation Board and the Office of Public School Construction to determine the definition of compliance in this technical term, funky period. And so, we're, as school districts, we're kind of caught. We're looking to both agencies to guide us through this process, and we would really appreciate any clarity that the OPSC and DIR can provide us in that situation.
Yep.
Thank you.
And that's a very good point. Thanks, Patty. We do intend to work very closely with DIR to make sure that we sorted out whose jurisdiction is it, what's the legal authority, and who has it, and then provide districts, stakeholders, information so that everybody knows. But we will look into it and find out.
So I'm pretty sure that things are going to happen in the next 2 months, so let's spend this time, and it may be something that we do bring this up and have a conversation as January of just kind of where we are, if we figured out any policy stuff or have questions that we're able to answer. That may be a good time where this comes back to IMP and we use this more of as a information follow-up discussion and how we go through and do those things. So thank you. Yep.
Really quickly, sorry, Madam Chair, and there's some other things that DR may be doing to the regulations as well. We're just talking about what we do in this meantime, but what changes are they going to be making to the regulations, or what's going to happen? That's something that's still forthcoming, and we really can't speak to that. But right now, we're just trying to address this time period and what happens if the regulations are repealed, what happens to SBX 29, what happens to districts that are caught in this period. But moving forward, there may be changes to those regulations that were repealed, and what are they going to be? Then that's a DIR kind of question for their regulations.
Yeah, Dennis and Deborah?
Did I understand someone to say that the repeal of these regulations was only effective until May 4th of next year? So if nothing happens between now and then, which would be unusual, but if nothing happens, then those regs come back as they are?
Correct. Treat them as suspended.
It's a repeal suspension. Suspension kind of...
It's a suspension. If they didn't actually get repealed, they were suspended until May 4th.
Okay.
So
Deborah?
Just to clarify a little bit more, so if you are a person, if you are a district that goes out, has a contract, say in December, January, you are in which land? Or country? What do you follow?
Follow current law as it exists. As this is right now, with that repealed, it's the law as it currently exists before SB 2X9.
If I could clarify that, basically go back to the program as it was before July 1st of 2010 and operates as it always was.
Yes, that's exactly it. So pretend like that's the law of the land and the new law may be coming.
Never happened.
Correct. Pretend we never had this nightmare. And the only thing you have to worry about is what happens on May 5th, 2011. Right now, none of this happened. We didn't have any of these discussions go back to before any of this changed. Yes, Dennis?
And that the emergency regs to suspend those regs, that has been approved.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Yep.
One more question, just so I'm sure. So if you are a district and you start everything and do your contracts December, January, February, when the laws changed in May, that doesn't apply?
No, it's at the time. It's the contract, it's at the time. So if you sign a contract on May 5th, 2011, yes. You sign it on May 3rd and there's still nothing in place, currently as it exists. So as soon as a new set is adopted, then that's what will apply. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Laura. All right, ORG. So with ORG, Dia's going to kind of go through, give you a quick overview, and then we're going to take each on the chart, we're going to take each item one at a time and have the discussion before we move on so we can exhaust that and then head on down. So, Dia, all yours.
Good morning. I'm not talking loud. I apologize. As loudly as possible. At the October 14th, staff provided an overview of the ORG program to committee members and stakeholders. Comments and concerns were expressed on the current program requirements, and staff has outlined a summary of all the comments and concerns from the committee members and stakeholders. That is provided in attachment A. The chart includes the following areas to discuss, which is the 175% pupil density, seabeds, semi-annual, blending cycles, and the transfer bond authority. The chart does outline the current requirements for each of these areas, the suggested potential changes, and whether the requirement is set in statute or in SFP regulations. Each suggested potential change has a description of how the changes might affect the program and the action that is necessary to modify the new ORG program. At this time, staff would like to seek input from the committee members and stakeholders on a summary of the comments that were made at the last meeting, and I will take you through each of the program areas for discussion. And I'd like to begin with the first portion, which is the 175% pupil density. And currently, the school site for pupil population density is equal to or greater than 175% of CE's recommended site size. And the suggested potential change is to lower the minimum population density school site size requirement, currently set to a minimum.
And then on the
So you're saying that if, as we're trying to digest this new information, that how the calculation is done kind of could be a policy shift, which would include 55, how many more?
55 elementary and 16 secondary schools, just as a rough
Estimate, which would include 25,000.
And keep in mind that that doesn't make all the adjustments for multi-story and all the classified production portals, because we really don't know what those would be. And that would, the 25,000 students is based on the average of 350 students per school site. Could be something different, but just as a number. So that looks like it would increase by, from 81,000 to 106,000, so 25% increase. The other side of the paper talks about what Kathy brought up. These would require legislative changes of changing the benchmarks from 150% to 125%. And you can just see that for K through 6. And it also looks at 2 seabed years. That was another thing that was brought up. If the legislation changes, there may be a change in the baseline seabed. And this chart will show you to reduce from 175 to 150, 269,000 K through 6 kids using 0506 seabeds, 197 using the more current seabeds. And following that across, we should have columns to 125. And that's a cumulative number. So the effects of reducing 150 are included in the effects of reducing to 125. And when actually that very far right column should say going from 125% to 100%.
Yeah, I was like, can you explain that one?
So that's that analysis. And then on the bottom, you can see that on average, between the 2 seabeds year, elementary schools, 85% of what they were using the old 0506, and secondary schools about half, just as another benchmark. If the seabeds data were to be updated, the eligibility numbers would probably go down, just as you see. So.
Kathy, then Juan, then Kathy. Go ahead.
So is I don't know if you know this, Fred, but is that because there are less overcrowded sites? Or what?
I think
what is that?
Probably it is somewhat as enrollment decreases in some cases, and maybe more schools distributing the students.
I think class size reduction, getting rid of class size reduction has also impacted.
Yeah, whether that increases the number or the density, don't know. Now, if we look at the newer seabeds, so whatever we may see that change as if districts close schools are increasing density at other schools. So that may be.
Kathy?
Fred, your calculations or your comments earlier on the first page relating to adjusting the acreage, is that excluding certain areas that really just can't be used to put
No.
buildings or?
Because the net usable acres, I'm assuming, would be the same. So that would be the denominator, right? That would remain unchanged. What would change would be the number of acres we would recommend. So instead of just measuring it by number of students per acre, would be that actual calculation we make of recommended acres versus actual.
Has there been
the letters?
Has there been any thought to looking at excluding unusable acres? I mean, I know that's always supposed to kind of be.
That should have been excluded in what was reported. If that was not what the district reported, that should have been, they have that opportunity to take that out. Because it should be usable acres
Yeah,
for various.
I do have another.
You go ahead.
Just a weird comment. And maybe I'm just hypersensitive to this because we put a bond on the ballot, did not pass. So, however, I'm still a growth district, have kids coming, and will be having to put them someplace. So I'm just kind of wondering on a statewide basis what effect that might have on school districts that are still growing, that don't have local funds, that might be having to cram more kids on existing sites. If that would increase that eligibility pool or allow more districts to participate. But maybe not based on a 506 seabeds.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Good benchmark for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're kind of stuck with the 0506 seabeds. So the only thing that would help you right now is the potential policy shift. Well, no, because you still have to have funds. Yeah. Deborah, then Chris?
Fred, with going back to the 05, the 06, and the acres, kind of what Kathy was asking you, is how much flexibility, you said that it has to be a legislative change to go from 0506?
That is an absolute, no. Seabeds is an absolute, without a doubt, legislative change.
The 0506 date.
Yeah, the 0506 date and those numbers is an absolute statute legislative change. There's no flexibility.
And what about the acres again? It's just based on your recommended acres, because if you have a site that is much larger, but half of it's not usable, then we would go to your recommendation for...
Well, I think that's one, if it has a wetland you can't use, that probably should have never been reported as usable anyway. But if it accidentally was, we could, that's different information that can be looked at. And the other one is just more than the calculation of the site, how do you get to 175%?
So there is some flexibility with that with your office?
Well, right now the policy is to do it by the 175%, whether that is a change.
So let's...
That's just informational, that maybe there.
So let's make sure, because the back side of his page kind of goes into seabeds, which is the second part. So let's stick to the first side, kind of talk about the acreage, talk about if we want to have that added on to our recommendation. While the SAB has no control over CDE, what it can be discussed is maybe they prefer CDE take a look, relook at their policy, if that's the direction that the implementation committee would like, or you guys can individually also get a hold of CDE and discuss potentially.
Well, and also when we rolled this process out, it was worked with OPSC, and this is what we worked out and agreed upon at the time. So I think that we would not unilaterally make that change with the consultation.
Okay.
With the board.
Chris, then Mary?
Just to clarify, you said as it currently stands, there's more than enough eligibility to consume all available funding, correct?
There's 81,000 students in that, and assuming that would be more than $10,000 students, and so.
Okay, Mary?
Just still trying to clarify. I understand that CBED is legislation. We're saying that the 100 or 175% or 150% decisions, that is CE policy?
No.
5% is in statute.
That-
No matter how we determine that,
Okay.
using the average
Okay.
paint all or the line brush to.
So you would possibly redefine what 175% means. Is that?
It's how the calculation. So understand 175% is in statute. So one, the recommendation coming from the IMP, as we discussed last time, was to reduce that. So how that, whether that gets reduced to 150 and then down to 125 on the back end, that is lower the minimum density. Whether the board wants to adopt that or not, that is a recommendation. So, but what Fred's also saying, which probably we need to add on to this as part of under the 175% pupil density, is the calculation of the pupil density. And that's where Fred says this was worked out with CDE and OPSC, and if this implementation committee would like to add that one, would you like to add that to the recommendations? Yes, no, yes, yes, okay. So, one, will add that to the recommendation, because this was a CDE and OPSC, so recommendation is to recalculate, change the policy. So this would be then going, the action would be a policy change, but it should probably also be a discussion that the board has, and is this where they want to go? So it allows the full board to have that discussion in open, in public, to change the policy if that's where they so choose to go, and then they can direct OPSC and CDE to work together.
Yeah, there's another point of that too, is if the funds are all spoken for, theoretically, the most dense sites are the ones that are funded first. So if we look at this, these are going to be at the tail end of that list, and maybe a moot point. So it's just something to keep in mind too.
True, but as we've also noticed since '06, this money is not going out as it should be. So while the eligibility, quote unquote, could be taken up, it's not been used in 4 years, and in this climate, the legislature may decide by legislation to sweep it. So it's one of those things, if we're trying to maximize getting the money out, that might be something too.
Can you clarify sweep it?
Take legislation to move it to new construction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no confusion out there. We're not sweeping the money or taking it anywhere.
No, new.
In SFP.
Yeah, sweep it to new construction. Yeah, Dennis?
On these that require, like this one, that would require legislative and regulation, just to get an idea of the time frame, I mean, it's probably going to be March, April before legislation could be passed, and probably another 6 months before regulation could be. So we're talking 9 months to maybe a year before any of those changes could realistically be seen.
Except for the policy.
Okay.
So, yeah, anything that, just plan on 9 months, in between 6 months and a year for legislation and policy changes. So the program exists as is now. But this is also talking about the future because you guys wanted to keep ORG, not see it swept. So let's talk about the changes that would make it more effective if we're not getting the money out fast enough, with that as an understanding in the background. So we're in agreement with the first recommendation. And then we're adding kind of a, one directly underneath it, the 175%. Then we're going to add in a calculation of density. What the current would be how it's currently calculated. Suggested change would be the policy change that Fred is how you recalculate it. Impact would be the increase. Authority, it would allow you basically in Ed Code and SFP, and the action would be policy because it'd be interpretation of statute and regulation. So that's what will be added underneath this. Anything else on the 175% pupil density? Yes, Lee?
So I understand, so you're talking about, first you said that we're all in agreement about how Fred and CDE calculates the density. So that's adding 16 eligibility for 55 elementary schools and 16 Midland high schools.
If they change the policy.
If they change the policy. But, so we're also talking about changing, you're saying to the 175 as well, but we haven't talked about to what?
I think it's premature to discuss to what because this is a board decision. So first what the board has to say, yes, let's look at it, come back to IMP, what would you like? Because if we spend the time having that conversation, the board could say, we don't want to do that.
Okay.
So let's
saying that we are in agreement.
We're for the most in agreement that we want this to be looked at. Which remember, this is also pretty much a legislative thing. So if the board says yes, we want to do it, then it's subject to an assembly member or senator introducing legislation and doing it. We have no control over that, and then you guys all get involved in the legislative process.
So it's not helpful for us to talk about that at all, or
It may be, but right now it's premature because we don't have evidence in front of you with specifics, all data, discussion, and if the board says no, a legislator may still want to go through and do it, but I think it's very premature right now. Let's just kind of stick to the overview, and then based on the board, what they want can go in for this to go into specifics, but if they tell me no, then we can't have a conversation here. Any public comment on the 175% pupil density? Seeing and hearing none, we're going on to seabeds. We did start this comment, which the seabeds is based on the 05-06 enrollment. This is clearly in statute, would clearly require legislation, and now we can flip over Fred's chart, which he kind of shows at the very bottom of what happens with changing the seabeds from 05 to 06 to 08, 09. The recommendation was to allow the option of reestablishing the eligibility to another enrollment year. As you can see, although Fred did not do 09, 10, because those numbers are not certified completely yet, because we've got CalPADS issues as well. The most recent ones we can use are 08, 09. So a discussion on this, is this currently still a recommendation while understanding that many districts have declined their eligibility. They may be eligible under the current 05, 06 seabeds, but not under the 8, 9 seabeds. So any further discussion? Do we want to keep as is? Deborah?
Well, they would still be eligible until this was changed. change.
Correct,
between 8 and
correct.
9 months, so they have time if they want to.
Correct. Kathy?
Why can't it be either, or any year in between? I mean, we have an interesting situation with a lot of school districts that are closing school sites, and I don't necessarily think maybe they should be eligible for this money under that scenario. I haven't really thought that through because of declining enrollment, but you do have other situations where you're not declining and you're putting more kids on the campus, and your CPAD situation may have changed drastically from 05, 06 all the way up through 08, 09. So, and I understand, why it was put in 05, 06, or when it was written, it was put in for 05, 06, but I'm just wondering, wouldn't you want to do it when you walk in the door like we do now with a regular new construction app or a modernization app? You apply for eligibility for each project.
I mean, and then that presents another option other than establishing eligibility with, it could be we stop as suggested potential change, allow districts the option of establishing or reestablishing ORG at the time of application. Should it just say at the time of application instead of saying it based on recent enrollment? Recent enrollment at the time of application?
Current CBED.
Well, CBEDS is turning into CalPEDS, which may not be around because it has no money either. So.
I mean, I mean, it kind of goes contrary. If you're looking at, we're actually reducing the number of sites that would be eligible, but if the option were there, then I think more districts would be wanting to participate. So not getting rid of 0506, but
just in the past, in COS and all the other, there was always a post facto date because of some concern, perhaps on the legislature, not elsewhere, that districts would close schools and create overcrowded schools and be able to fund. So there is that sensitivity there, whether it happens or not. So I think it's always going to be a post facto date.
Yeah, because anybody have what the intent of this was? I mean, was that basically the intent when we created Establish 0506? Was it ever discussed as to how to update it, keep it relevant?
Well, I think given that they put 0506 into the statutes, that was their intention, was to limit it to that year.
Hey, you're not allowed to do that. I'll call you up just a second. Never hurts to go back and review intent as to what it meant and did that actually, because at that time we were all growing, so I think it was at that intent to stop for that because of growing. I don't think anybody really saw the drastic crash while it was happening at the same time. This went through 04, 05 with the legislation. Mary?
I would like to voice support for the idea of the option, because also assuming that you might have to take the most recent CBED planning stuff takes a long time, and you could be well into the planning process and get new CBEDs for the current year and discover all of a sudden you don't qualify anymore, or that you qualify for some different amount or something when your plans are already well down the line.
But that's where I think also understanding, thinking about policy, it's not about manipulating. There should be kind of a hard and fast date, as I don't want to assume districts will manipulate, but when you allow the option, it may not fully implement the intent of this.
Then perhaps a way for the 0506 number to become more relevant, and at 4 or 5 years old now, it's getting way out of date. And districts are in very different situations now than they were then. And so relying on those numbers strikes me as...
So it might be more relevant to use 0809 and just establish it as that.
When it updates, so to allow districts to have some ability to plan for things, rather than to get sweeping changes all.
Masha or Fred? I know. Okay. Fred?
You don't have to justify the eligibility in ORG. It's not like COS. So you're in and you're in. Okay.
That's correct.
Kathy?
I'll just, and I haven't really thought this through, I apologize, but, I mean, it personally, it would be better for me to use our 506 C-beds. I could, probably qualify. But I'm concerned, though, about folks who don't have local funding anymore, and like I said before, who are putting more and more students on campus that may now find themselves in this position where they're now overcrowded. And I don't know if the calculations take that into account. I don't think we should be rewarding districts who close schools and then apply for overcrowded relief grants. I think that's kind of oxymoron. But I also don't want to decrease the number of sites that would meet the requirement by changing from 05 to an established 0809. So going back to the option or the ability to, and I don't want to use the word manipulate, but we do plan for the most beneficial program for our needs at the time we have the funding, whatever. So,
well, and then it's called, while we're looking at this as a singular item, if there was to be legislation and a potential overhaul with ORG, if the intent is to allow and increase eligibility, then what would happen is you'd lower the pupil density, which, as you can see on the chart, and then update the C-beds, which would still keep about the same amount of districts that were eligible. So that's kind of a twofold. But what our recommendation needs to be is an adjustment or update of C-beds. What exactly ends up happening, what we're saying is we need to have the 05, 06 C-beds are not relevant anymore, and we need to look at updating or making the numbers used more relevant. So, yeah, Ron?
As we gather information on all these changes, especially the ones that require legislative changes, just wanted to make sure that we're clear that the OPSC doesn't have a position on proposed legislative changes. We want to hear input. We're going to report to the board, but as you're asking for input on each one of these, the OPSC doesn't have a position on any of these proposed legislative changes. Just want to make it clear.
So what I'm suggesting on attachment A, it should read, allow districts the option of establishing or reestablishing ORG eligibility with a more recent enrollment year, period. Lee?
Just some comments on what Kathy said a couple times. The districts are in many different situations right now with declining enrollment. And the idea that school districts would, I suppose I should never say never, but the idea that a school district would close a school, which is an incredibly disruptive, politically destabilizing, unbelievably chaotic, painful in a school district, that to everybody, the idea that they would do that to create eligibility for this program, I just don't buy that, unless their reasoning is way off. They may say, hey, wow, we could also do this, but to say they're being rewarded for closing a school, which nobody wants to do, I don't know. I just don't want to characterize school districts as doing that. And school districts are closing schools for non-facility reasons. They're closing schools because of the way we finance how school districts operate. They're doing it for operational reasons, not because they don't need the facilities. They'd rather have neighborhood schools. They can't afford to do it anymore. So I think that districts should be allowed to apply for any program that they are eligible for, even if they've closed schools. I know we're not saying anything like, well, if you close a school, you're not eligible. I hope we don't ever go down that route, because there's so many situations where that is happening for non-facility reasons. So, and I would just second or third the motion of giving districts the option, giving them flexibility. I don't think it's manipulation. It's what anybody does. They look at the best program that they can apply for that's going to give them the most funding. And I don't think there's anything wrong with us doing that.
All right. So any other public comments on this? Ron, you got anything?
Yeah, Ron WLC Architects. The reason I was,
Did you click? Is it on?
Ron WLC Architects. The reason I was just discussing, we seem to be avoiding Senator Hancock's comments when that one item came to board, and it said, although I agree with Lee, politically you never agree, but I agree with her on this, nobody's going to do that to close the site. But what happens if you have declining enrollment, and then you use the funds to when maybe a boundary adjustment will do the same thing? And so I think, I don't want to be a heretic here, but I think we need to take that into consideration, and maybe updating the seabed is a way of handling that. So I think it's have more impact than what we're originally talking.
Yeah, well, I'll understand that Senator Hancock brought up Sac City. Sac City is unique circumstances because it was dealing with a public school and versus a charter school, and so that more ends up in a political environment, not necessarily as clean as closing a school and declining enrollment and using this as well. Yes, Lee? And remember, I'm going to start closing down as we get into these political little things because this is not the subject of what we're going through.
And I appreciate Ron's comments. Again, the politics on the ground of the school district are so, as we all know, so much more than the state program. In fact, the state program usually doesn't calculate into it at all in any discussion of any school board. The staff may be thinking, wow, I could be able to, I'd like to be able to take advantage of some funding. But again, I don't think we want to get into micromanaging from the state level on whether school districts change boundaries, close schools, or do anything like that. They have financial reasons. Districts are going under, as we all know, and there are many, many ways that they have to deal with that. So I would hate to get into the situation of micromanaging a school district, telling it what it can and can't do.
Thank you, Lee. We got your comments on the record. Any other public comments?
Regina Bill, State Home and Interior Architecture. Just one request, and that would be for, I have a number of clients who are in the process of planning and are planning to submit for ORG. If we do decide to change the criteria for eligibility, is there a provision for grandfathering, such as if they were to submit their eligibility documents to CDE and or OPSC prior to changing the criteria, would they have the ability to come in and request funding after that?
We'll approach that if it ever's to happen. All right, moving on to the semi-annual. This is something that it says the board shall create a list of projects eligible for funding and shall approve applications semi-annually on a schedule determined by the board. Suggested potential change is accept and approve applications on a continuous filing basis up to bond authority. Authority says Ed Code and Reg, and this is legislation and regulation. I actually will disagree that legislation and reg. I believe it can actually be done even without a regulation change. I believe it is just interpretation of current existing statute. Let me go to specifically 1859.184. Because we changed these regulations, and it takes, so it's on the back page, stamp IMP 6. So you've got overcrowding relief grant application submittal and apportionment. A says the board shall, which is required, accept approved applications for ORG as follows. A2, the board shall accept approved applications on a semi-annual basis. So the board, which is SAB or OPSC, shall accept, so no application should ever be returned. So anybody who's listening via webcast and wants to submit ORG, submit it at any time. Do not wait for any board action, as regulations already established that the board shall accept these. Shall is required. It is not a may. Then you go to section B. The board shall apportion. So A is accept, which means OPSC shall accept. The board shall apportion ORG as follows. Go down to B7. B, which is the trump of the subsection of 7, says shall, which legally interpreted is required. 7 says the board may. which gives the board the option. However, these two as drafted are in conflict with each other, and when they're in conflict, the higher authority always rules it, and the higher establishing overarching is B, which says shall. So the board, which should be, shall accept applications every 6 months that are received by the last business day in January and July until ORG are exhausted. Therefore, when we redrafted and changed these, it is my opinion and my legal opinion that these should be approved and brought to the board on a continuous basis from whenever received on the last day of January 31st, then processed and brought to the board, and then as well as July 31st, processed and brought to the board. I don't see, unless we need to make it abundantly clear as drafted in regulation, that this requires any regulation or legislative change. That is my legal opinion, and I would suggest that on this document, the action that the IMP should adopt is just policy interpretation and direction to the board to implement this. So I know there are others that may be in disagreement with me or agree with me, but look forward to any comments based on this. Juan?
I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but I think that this is an issue that the board requested to be brought back before them. So I don't know that we should be directing school districts to take an action until that board makes a determination. But I understand the reading of A2 versus B7, and whether the board has a discretion. It's something we're going to present to the board for further discussion.
I understand everything that we have a discussion today will be presented to the board, so this option would be the IMP option. If OPSC has another option, they would be presenting their own. It's my clear understanding and reading that regs are clear as to what the state allocation board should do, and we just need to make sure that the board hears this, and if they agree with my interpretation, follow through on this, but this is how I see it, and I will advise the board of this. Eric, then Chris?
No, go first.
This is the issue I raised at the board last week. We interpret A2 to be the overriding power, and it's the LPSC accepting applications for processing. Whether or not the SED is going to approve those fundings every 6 months, I think if we're going to talk about making any slight change, it might be to B7, and changing it from A to shall. But from our perspective, we should be able, all school districts should be able to submit their applications on a continuous basis until the funds are exhausted. It doesn't make sense to me that we should freeze the accepting of applications when we have $400+ million available for apportionments. So it just doesn't make sense that we're trying to get money out the door. We're trying to get projects out on the street. We shouldn't create I think it's self-inflicted, a problem when I think the regulations, they're a little wording, a little funny, but I think in general, provide for the authority to go forward and OPC to move these projects on a semi-annual basis.
Chris?
I'm just concerned with the AEO issuing legal opinions in her capacity as the AEO. I'm very concerned with that. I just want to put that on the record.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think my 10 years of legal experience would allow me to state what I legally believe, but you can disagree with that.
I just disagree that in your capacity as AEO that you should be issuing legal opinions.
And we will agree to disagree, because I'm not ignoring my law school degree, which basically I paid a house for. Yep, Mary?
I guess the place where I have a question, and I don't have an opinion here, I just want to ask the question, it says in part 2 that the board should portion overcrowding relief grants based upon the highest density of the eligible schools. And if you apportion them continuously, it becomes a first in, first out, and how do you ever decide which the densest schools are?
At the time of application.
And so that seems to be that seems to me to just add confusion to the whole issue of whether or not we should be doing this on a continuous basis.
Well, I think, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what's at question is, when does the filing period start? And does it start right after the last day, July 30th, I believe, or
February 1st.
So should the board accept applications August 1st, 2010 through potentially January 9th of 2011? So I think you're still going to have a filing period, just identifying, when it is, an application submitted within this filing period. And I think right now we're just talking about, when does it start? We know when it ends, when it could potentially end, January, but when should the OPSC accept the applications? But I think that we're still on a semi-annual basis. I don't know if this is the argument, that we still do it, but just in filing periods.
From between February 1st through July 31st, whatever the last working day of that month is, whatever that business day is, that is the filing period. And then all those applications in that period received will then be jumbled together, or however the calculation works, and not first come, first served.
Okay.
That's how I interpret this whole regulation.
Right, and then the funding would be issued as soon as it can be issued, as opposed to waiting until...
Correct.
Yep. So, any further discussion, Masha?
I'm sorry, just a reason, Marshall, I apologize, I missed the last board meeting. So it was a
Whatever.
The potential change, though, says accept and approve applications on a continuous files basis. So that's why I second the comments early, is that it sound like two different things. So one question is when the applications are accepted, which I'm interested in for CSA because it creates sizable impact for us. And one is when does it approve, and if the board approves them on a continuous basis, then the issues about the competitive nature includes the scores on the table. So I think that needs to be clarified.
So, should it say accept and approve applications on a semi-annual, which is already stated in regs?
I would split the issue.
Just strike it.
The immediate issue at hand is can OPC continue to accept applications if there's no future funding cycle set? Isn't that one of the questions?
Yes and no. One of them, kind of. So, semi-annual, it's one, OPSC continue to accept, and two, fund on a semi-annual basis.
I think those are two things.
Thanks, Masha.
But I think that it helps clarify. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for anybody in this room, but that was my understanding, that it would be, filing periods on a semi-annual basis, not continuously all the time. Unless somebody else was having that interpretation that we should be accepting applications all year versus on the filing period.
So this kind of actually blends how we discuss semi-annual and funding. So semi-annual actually should be acceptance. We should probably program areas. It should be named acceptance of applications. On this, where it says semi-annual, we should name the program area acceptance of application. Because the second one right below it, where it says funding cycles, that's the second part of it. So let's flip it from February 1st to July 31st, and then August 1st through January 31st.
So I'm asking why you're eliminating the shall approve application semi-annually, because you still have to have that semi-annual period for approval to determine, based on the most overcrowded, what applications would be filed.
So the board, but what it should say is the board shall create a list of approved applications for funding.
And
application for funding semi-annually. And the suggested potential change is accept, take out the and, accept approved applications on a continuing filing basis of bond authority, and then we need to define the application period.
But applications are accepted on a continuous basis.
Correct. No, they're accepted, then OPSC has to approve, or they approve to go to the board for funding. Just because you turn in an application does not mean that it is approved. Two separate things.
It's only approved if it is within the most overcrowding, correct?
Yeah, but you have to determine, you have to look at the seabeds and the statistics and the 175%. Some school district could be, when it comes out, only 149%. They're not at the 179. So just because you turn in, OPSC has the obligation to accept them, but then it's OPSC that has to make sure that the district has met all the requirements, so that's where it creates an approved application that then goes to the OPSC for funding. Or SAB, sorry. To the SAB for funding. So that's where acceptance of application, the board shall create a list of approved applications for funding semi-annually. Suggested potential change. Accept approved applications on a continuous filing basis semi-annually up to bond authority. Oh, wait, no. Continuous filing basis, and then we can say the next one, filing periods are. So filing periods are...
Position, but wouldn't it just be easier to say that there are 2 funding cycles per year and just delineate them than try something very complicated?
Well, that's why filing periods are February 1st through July 30th and August 1st through January 31st.
Can I try?
Yeah.
I'm following. I'll try not to. A is the acceptance of the application. The regulation is, it's consistent with the statute. The board shall accept approved regulations for applications on a semi-annual basis. I don't know why we need to play with that. It seems consistent, simple, and we already work under that. I think the tricky part that's getting people is B7, but that's going to be part of the next.
That's the next one. But I think it's it's what is making a policy clear of the interpretive regulation, because right now that issue was brought up, which LAUSD brought up, of having your application returned to you.
Well, if we want to clarify, I guess we can just simply put in the dates. We've established that the end of the business day in January and July is the closure of the filing period, so we can just simply specify the dates under A2 would be probably so between February 1st and the last business day of July, or I don't know, the first, how you word that, but specify what that period is and just put that in A2 and call it a day. And I would clarify, this is a point in time that this grouping will be calculated together for the purposes of apportionment. And then you do an apportionment, but we all know that 365 days, everyone's going to be filing an application for ORG. We're just identifying the grouping for each semi-annual apportionment.
Well, and the thing that needs to take place is the action. It needs to be changed into, say, policy. Because while you're talking about putting this in reg, then this won't go into effect for 9 months, and then we'll continue to bicker over this. And
here and agree that it's policy, or
but bringing it up to the board of, we want the board to interpret the reg to mean this. So that's the suggestion we're bringing to the board. Yes, Dennis?
Just thinking, has there ever been a case where a project that meets all the criteria has been denied because it wasn't on Fred's list of the most densely populated? I would assume, since we still have money in this pot, that that's not the case.
That's not
so
the case.
Why do we even have this semi-annual windows? Why not just open it up and say you file an application and it gets approved based on the criteria until the money's gone?
And that could be another suggested change. You can have this one of policy interpretation, but what you're asking for is then a regulation change. And I think, and a statute change. Statute. So then you're actually asking for a year process. So that, I mean, that, you know, so that could be Part A is a policy, Part B is allow on a continuous filing basis, which would then be a statute change.
So Lisa, the next apportionment will be February for this?
If the board agrees with our interpretation, then the applications will be accepted through January 31st. Then OPSC has to go through the processing for then it to come to the board maybe March, April. Because remember, application deadline January 31st. They're not going to have it ready for the February board meeting.
Well, the approved applications that are received by July 30th, 2010 shall be apportioned any remaining funds. So they'll be apportioned when?
Whenever it gets to the board.
We just took to the board last week, the last filing, I think it was the 6th. Applications were received July 31st, 2010. They just went to the board last week for approval.
So it took 4 or 5 months to get to the board.
So those, we already processed those applications. Now we're talking about applications submitted after July 31st.
So even though they can only submit semi-annually, you can take them to the board at any time?
Yes.
Well, we'll take it after we review them and accept them. So.
And how do you rank that if you went ahead and, maybe I'm confused, which is probably the case, but if you have an application and you're funding, if it's done semi-annually, then the close of approved applications that are received by July 30th, received in your office. So it takes OPSC July, August, September, October, 3 months to make sure they're all eligible, put them in order, and then take them to them.
Correct.
And you just did that last week.
Correct.
Okay. So then the next closing cycle will be?
January 31st.
January 31st, okay.
If the board agrees next month with our interpretation.
Okay.
Yes, Lee?
Just a question for Juan. Does OPSC staff, when an application is received, does staff immediately start processing it, or do you to see if it's eligible, or do you wait until the whole pile of them are, wait till the end of that filing period, then you process it, or do you start to work on them and say, here, this one's eligible, this one's not, so that it could possibly speed up the time?
It's typically a two-step process. There's usually an intake review, which is when the application is submitted, and then there's an in-depth analysis. We'll start taking a look at the project-specific information, but then when we start grouping them together for presentation to the board, we have to wait till all of them are submitted. But yeah, we can start reviewing them.
And you notify them if they're not eligible?
Yes. Yeah, we notify, we do our typical intake, 24-hour letters, 15-day letters, 4-day letters.
Just so you know, last funding cycle, we got 9, 6 went to the board, 2 did they withdraw, and 1 was not eligible.
Yes.
So it has happened, but we just have to do the due diligence. So that'll have an A and a B of, just defining the filing periods, and then B would be the continuous filing period, which would be a change in reg and statute. So we have 2 parts to that one. 1, a policy interpretation, and 2, a reg and statute change to allow on a continual basis and not semi-annually. So now moving to funding cycles, which is the B7 interpretation. 1859-184 B7. So this says the current that the board has approved ORG grants for 6 previous funding rounds, which are currently laid out in regulations. Suggested potential change, seek board approval for a 7th funding round, final filing date, January 31st, 2011. Does anybody see that there needs to be, besides this, if it's more of have the board interpret that any other filing rounds don't need board action, that it's a board action for approval or funding, but how should it be worded? Yes, Eric?
This is just me sitting in the audience listening to the board the last few months, so anyone can have a different opinion for sure, but I look at the regulation and we have, oh, I'm sorry, I don't even know if this is working. We have, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 regulations for every funding cycle we've had, and then I know in January, looking at the item, the board approved items number 6 and number 7. And I kind of interpreted that to mean that they were kind of done with actually approving a new regulation every 6 months to, announce that there's a new funding cycle, that the intent of 7 was to basically say, okay, we're just going to keep doing this until all funds have been exhausted. And so I kind of interpret 7 to be the last regulation we have to talk about for every funding cycle if the board will take action. The tricky part is, and Juan and I have had this conversation, is the word may, shall. Because may is not consistent with the rest of the regulation, nor is it consistent with the statute. So, I mean, that kind of throws some people into, a tizzy, but I mean, I think for the intent of the board, I mean, if we're only going to apportion $10, $20, $40 million every 6 months, we're going to have about 6 pages worth of regulations for every 6 months approval. And it just doesn't make sense. And I think the board kind of said 7 should be the last one, and we'll just continue to apportion until the money's gone.
And I think what needs to be brought to the board next month for the board to just specifically say is, okay, maybe it should have been shall, but how we read this is B says the board shall apportion. We're just going to have that OPSC accepts them, here's the filing period, and at each filing period, however appropriate amount of time it takes for OPSC, OPSC shall bring it to the board for apportionment until money is exhausted or legislation.
One more thing is that I don't necessarily know why it says may accept applications. It should actually say board may approve applications. Except with the OPSC's role in 2. It seems redundant that accept is under B7.
Which is for a portion.
For a portion.
Because the two kind of are in conflict. So it does need a reg clarification, and maybe that's what we bring to the board, is a reg clarification that the board shall apportion accepted applications.
Can I just...
Yeah, Juan?
I think the intent was that we weren't going to have regulations, for every funding cycle. It does give the board that discretion to establish future funding cycles, and one way to interpret the regulation is that the board does have the authority through a board action to establish a filing period and subsequent filing periods until the money's out. That's one interpretation, or the board could just set it on an as-needed basis, and it's up to the board. They can do either of those. But it wasn't intended that this regulation would require future regulations to establish the filing periods, just at the board's discretion. How they want to do it, whether it's, set up semi-annual filing rounds from now until the money's out, one option for the board. Another option is let's establish it the next one, and then they can revisit the issue later. But those are the options for the board. They can definitely do that.
So if the board directs OPSC to just continue these applications every 6 months, then that's what OPSC will do. And if we were to do reg changes, the cleanup is needed. Any public comment on that? Bruce?
Thank you, Lisa. Bruce Hancock, Onson Park. First, I'd just like to express my support for that position, that we have a regular, predictable filing period that districts can depend on. It costs money and time to get an application, plan, specifications, and approvals in line for the program. Districts need to be able to rely on it. So we support that. Secondly, I just wanted to comment, it seemed like this was the right place because you have the chart showing the funding, that I think we should be just a little bit careful about talking about the money going in this program going out slowly. remember first that it is for the replacement of portables, so the projects do tend to be smaller projects. We're not talking about full school sites. Secondly, and maybe Dia can help me on this one, but on the cover sheet, it says that we have about $450 million left, and I should know this, and I shouldn't be announcing publicly that I don't. But when I look at the chart, if I add it up in my head correctly, it shows that we have made about $650 million worth of approvals, which would leave about $350 million rather than $400. So I'm sure it's my confusion, but I guess my main point is I think the money has been going out in the program. It is a program of smaller construction projects, generally speaking. So we should be kind of careful about, advertising that there's money just laying around that isn't needed. That's really, I think, would be an incorrect impression. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Can we just double check?
We'll take a look at.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just, and we'll take a look at the numbers, Bruce. I don't know whether it should.
Certain additions that had happened that are not included in that, and it was just because it was a lot cleaner that way.
It doesn't include the errors and omissions.
It's not, and so just for clarification purposes, that is the reason.
Okay, Richard?
Well, I think maybe that answers my question, because my calculation shows that we've gone through about 517 million and some change, but that doesn't square with the remainder. So
Exactly, and we did want to put the correct number that does reflect on the status of funds, because that's the correct amount.
Okay, so just to extent that when it goes to the board, we can have the amount approved, and then we can have the total amount, whether errors or omissions or rescissions, whatever has happened, so that because I guarantee you somebody's going to add it all up and then say, hey, this doesn't meet. So, any other public comment, Richard?
I have one other question. Where could I go to get a list of the projects in the districts that have been funded to date through these 6 different cycles?
The board date is listed, so if you go on the OPSE website.
Is there a link I can go to that shows me all of the projects in the districts? You don't. Okay.
And at this time, since our OPSC website really doesn't have any archives, you can send me an email and we'll send it to Lisa Jones, because the archives have not been put up in the new OPSC website.
The SAB archives are up there. That's where we pulled it from. I know what you're talking about. And that is, but for these here, you can go in and
Okay. And then I have a related question. It gets to Fred's issue about reducing the density and the additional projects and districts that would be available at a reduced density. Is there a list of those projects, Fred, at 150 and 125?
There, obviously, we grants going to do this. I wouldn't put a lot of
stock.
Yeah, that it's going to change because we didn't make the adjustments for multi-story, class size reduction, SFP projects, growth projects related to growth. But that list, if I can find it, this probably exists, but I wouldn't invest with it.
Okay.
All right, anything else on funding cycles? Seeing and hearing none. Transfer of bond authority. Currently, no bond authority can be transferred. Provide authority to transfer ORG bond authority to new construction. Suggested potential change. That was not the IMP.
Where did that come from?
I have no idea. That was, there was, hold on, Richard. Hold on. You weren't here last time. While there is a split, majority tends to say no transfer. Some say allow legislative transfer. So it actually needs to show that there was not a complete consensus on this.
I don't think there wasn't any of them, were there? Was there?
For the most part, there was, but on this one, so if you object and want the transfer, that's where it would be.
Can I talk now?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you don't know Kaplan's rules. You have to get my approval before you speak.
Rules of order, okay. This is, I'm sorry. This is something that I think, looking at the overall health of the SFP and how we can be best positioned in 2012 to be able to convince the public to support another school bond is the goal of all of us. And to the extent that this program was either potentially overfunded or undersubscribed or not, the fact is that there's a large remainder there, and if we don't do something about possibly a rebenching or trying to move projects through so that the money isn't there and doesn't remain when we go for a bond, then we're going to be in a tough position to convince the public to support another bond. Now, with the changes we've been talking about here, absent some potential regulations, would have to happen by statute. And the chances are, absent an extraordinary vote of the legislature, that if we put a bill in and made some changes to kind of relieve some of the blockades to the program and allowed more districts to participate, that bill wouldn't become effective until January 1 of 2012, and the regulations then would take some time after that, and we'd be into a new bond at the same time that we continue to have a relatively large amount of money sitting in this account. So one of the ideas, in addition to trying to advance some legislation that would try to bring more projects into the ORG program, is to also look at the ability to give the State Allocation Board, on an as-needed basis, the ability to shift funds, giving them the maximum flexibility to shift funds between different programs, so that when we do get to 2012, that we're not in a position where we've got a lot of money sitting in accounts and having a very difficult time convincing voters to approve a new bond. So we're not objecting to anything at all. What we're looking for is to give the State Allocation Board the maximum flexibility to be able to manage the money in the account so that we can be in the best position possible to get a bond in 2012.
Well, and then just to give a little bit more background in understanding this, that flexibility, if it were to happen, would not come into place until January 1st, 2012 as well. There is no flexibility that can be allowed in this program unless via statute. It is very clear in statute. So it's kind of a twofold, that if districts want ORG and get funding, I would suggest get your applications in this year, because if legislation did go through, whether we did clean it up or if there was legislation that was brought forth and the governor did sign to take some of the money into new construction, they can't take the money that is put in applications now, and if what they can do is do contingency language based on whatever applications are July 31st. So whatever is left in the account then, if legislation was to go through, would take that amount. But if all that money's gone based on the next two cycles, then all that money's gone based on the next two cycles. We've got Eric and Fred.
By the two-thirds vote, the legislature may transfer, right?
I believe so, yes.
To do construction.
They transfer.
The board's authority to determine, or may they specify either
I don't. I think that you can do that in statute where it goes, because it says may transfer.
So it's not, you're not just doing construction.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. It's not just, it could be anywhere.
Right.
I'm sorry, if you look at the attachment D, what we're referring to is the very first section, 100820, and it's that B2 is very loud. It does talk about that may not increase or decrease the total amount to be that's what it is. I don't have the whole subdivision in front of me, so I'm trying to see either way. But I think
Probably it's talking about bond authority. So if like high performance was given $100 million, you can't go over the $100 million. That's generally what that means for the bonding.
The other piece is since we require the two-thirds, that would be emergency measure.
It would go effect in 90, is that 30? 90 days?
Whatever it is. So
30 days.
Before 21st, it could be.
Yeah, so if honestly, if the legislature goes in and for whatever reason is able to pass a two-thirds and get it to the governor, it would go into effect 30 days? 30 days? 30 days.
Yeah, I believe it's 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah, there would be no reason that they wouldn't put an emergency clause in the bill that requires a two-thirds vote anyway.
So yeah, it's not just simple legislation. It would require a two-thirds vote on each house to get this in to go forward. Yes, Eric?
Los Angeles Unified is like the sponsor for ORGA, and I appreciate Richard's comments about I'm a realist too, and I kind of can see how things are all kind of being laid out on timelines. But we can't lose sight of the fact that ORG was created for a specific purpose. There's a need out there that needs to be met, and we need to ensure that those needs are being taken care of, addressed the money. I would argue in favor of transferring it once it's been determined across the state that need has been met and there's money still left available, that the money should be transferred over. Our biggest fear is that the money gets transferred over for other school districts to build new schools, and that need is still being unmet, and that those schools are still being disadvantaged. The money is intended for that purpose, so I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
And just to bring sight of some of the extra reading that I did send on, while the policy Lincoln Maldiff report is old, on page 6 it pretty much says that there's about $18 billion would be needed in state matching funds to relieve the state's estimate of overcrowding problem. While this was done in '05, I'm sure that number is still very high today as the total amount that would be needed to do this. So I don't think there's an argument about need. I think it's eligibility and who applies and how they get that.
I'd just like to clarify, though, that if that $18 billion, if you include new construction, that alleviates some of that because you're providing additional classrooms and space. So it's not just to this program.
I'm just reading from the Maldiff report, which says recent data from the implementation of COS program indicates that more than 4 times that amount, almost $18 billion, would be needed in state matching funds to relieve the state's estimate of overcrowding problem. The true cost could go much higher if California decides to eliminate the inadequate measures. I'm just trying to make sure we are talking about facts.
That within that fact is that new construction alleviates overcrowding as well, as some school districts provide for new schools to alleviate overcrowding.
True, and Chris, we're arguing over minor details, whether that $18 billion is $10 billion, it's still somewhere in the billion, so that I'm just indicating that there is need, still is there. Yes, Kathy?
I agree partially with Richard's comments on, we want to do everything we can to make sure that it's going to be easy for the voters to pass a bond in 2012. I'm totally for that. I think the way we get there, that's where I disagree with your philosophy on that. I think, first of all, $400 million, $350, whatever it is chump change. I mean, it really is. It's just not a lot of money. And it was designed to go for a specific purpose. My overall philosophy on this, and many of the other SAP programs, is instead of making it so difficult for districts to qualify for in this case, this ORG program, why can't we just tweak it a little bit and allow more districts to qualify for the program, spend the money down, and get something on the ballot and move forth, instead of trying to make it harder for districts to access those different pots of money. I mean, it's seismic. And we had to go back and make some tweaks to that. So I don't agree necessarily with the concept of allowing or giving the SAB authority to transfer money here and there, because another reason is I go down a path thinking I qualify for a particular program based on the amount of funds that are in that program. And somebody mentioned here, Mary, I think it takes a long time. And all of a sudden that money just gets, I'll use the word sweep because we're all using it in our local operational budgets, it gets swept, and now all of a sudden that application is just null and void. I've wasted, tens of thousands of dollars or however much it might be, and now I'm stuck. And so now I might have to go down a different path, and I might end up with the same thing if the SAB has the authority to just take $10 million from here and $5 million from there. I would rather open up the programs that are there, make them a little bit more easier for people to participate, spend the money down where it's supposed to be spent, put a bond on the ballot in 12, and let's get going.
Okay, Fred?
Kathy, and Chris pointed out earlier, there's enough eligibility to exhaust it. Has there been, we haven't heard much reasons as to why districts aren't retaining that check. Is there?
No money?
No money where from? For the districts or the match?
The match. Bond authority. Bond authority match.
So, at the local level. So whatever changes are made here doesn't affect that.
But it might open up some other districts who do have local funding available to participate in the program. Possibly.
Eric?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, if I can tell.
Eric, Mike.
Not a lot of folks notice, maybe they do, I don't know. When ORG was put through, there was a big group in the legislature that LA would just drop out of the CLS program and jump into ORG because there's no eligibility. And so one of the agreements that we had to make was we wouldn't go into ORG until we completed all our CLS. Well, we just filed our last CLS. So we're now just getting into ORG. So we haven't even touched ORG yet. We've only filed a handful of applications. Our intent is to start filing the application. So the chunk change, we anticipate to go, I just don't know when. We're just now going through and identifying our projects, perfecting them, and hope to actually start applying for that money. But there's great competition. I mean, LAUSD has barely entered the program, and nearly $500, $600 million has already gone out the door to grow the rest of the state. So, the money will go. It's just a matter of time, and it will go fairly quickly once we can get this big, this machine moving again on the machine. But that's our explanation, because I think a lot of people think that it was intended for LAUSD and overcrowded schools as a complement to CLS, and I agree it was, but it's just a matter of time. That's pretty much what it is. So that's just a little backstory for LAUSD.
Any other comment, public comment? Come on, Joe. Use Eric's.
Hi, Joe Dixon, San Diego Unified School District. We have 63 schools in our district. We have 5 ORG projects under construction and funded. There's 2 on the unfunded list. But on the CDE list, we have a number of other sites that are eligible based on the 175, but they're ineligible because of some of the minor tweaking that Kathy was talking about, as well as to get it through OPSC, the 7 projects we had to borrow eligibility from some other sites to fully complement or meet the requirements. So if we tweaked it just a little bit, that would help Santa Ana and tweak it quickly before Eric moves, because it's going to be going real fast. That's Santa Ana, and I think I would speak for other urban districts that I've talked to anyway, besides LA, would support keeping the ORG in there, allowing us to use the funds for what it's intended for, reducing building footprints on these really small sites, and it'll go quick. Well, we could reduce the density requirements to 175.
That's not a tweak. That's legislation.
It's relative. And there's some of that eligibility thing. I'm not an expert on how we had to do it. It was a complicated process. But by borrowing grants from other sites and then therefore those sites aren't eligible, doesn't seem helpful for the program. Thank you.
All right, any final parting comments before, yes? Yeah, any last minute, what's not on this, want to add?
I wanted to see if, I thought we had the conversation before, and I didn't see it on this list, but I thought we had a conversation about the 6-month requirement.
Oh, yes, we did.
And there was some concern about the fact that 6 months was fine to get the kids out of the K-12 program, but maybe not enough time to get this portable off the site. Not to disrupt the school year, that summer would be an opportunity, but that doesn't necessarily fall within 6 months.
And if I remember correctly, it's either a statute or a regulation.
Statute.
So,
legislative fix, but I just want to make sure it's on the list if that's possible.
yeah, it would be it's page 4 stamp imp, it would be 17079.30. A1 says the 6 month after initial date of occupancy is what could be allowed is 2B has the exclusions of potentially allowing, getting the kids out, but allowing them to be used or kept on site for as summer school or other things, because right now it allows it to be used for child's care or preschool programs, but expanding the use.
Yeah, the district can certify that the classroom is no longer in K-12 use, but, there's a plan to have it removed during the summer just because it's 6 months. It really could harm the district's ability to actually complete and file without, worrying about MI or any other factors associated with non-compliance.
So, just so I'm clear, so 6 months is not enough time to move portables, is that? the problem?
Will disrupt your
Without
instructional
disrupting the
program.
school. Depending on where the portable is located, you're going to bring in a crane and bring it over to classes. There's so many different scenarios. I mean, we could talk about all day, but I think we just need to have some flexibility.
So it's certified 6 months to remove the kids out of it, but then allow flex time for the removal of the portable.
That's unless someone says.
I've also heard that those portables were used for international modernization, so that have kids in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
But that's a legislation, so it would be a twofer. So one, allow for flexibility on removing it, but also a legislative change of potentially expanding it to be used for other purposes.
But it says it can as long as it's removed from the eligible site.
right, so district will remove that portable and bring in another one for a modernization project, which makes a lot of sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But legally solid.
Yeah. So basically, it would be to add that on, which would require a statute change, but allow some flexibility, so that would be included as to, added to the chart. So is there anything else or other discussion to add to the chart on issues with ORG? Seeing and hearing none, we are out of here. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully I see you in December. If not, happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Christmas. I enjoy spending time with you all, and I'll see you soon.